Our next guest is a writer, philosopher, statistician, adjunct professor, and many other things. Please welcome back to the program Dr. Matt Briggs. Good evening, sir.
Good evening. How are you?
Great. Thank you very much. So this is an interesting conversation because last week I did an interview with a gentleman, and we were comparing the political establishment's public opposition to Mr. Trump in 2016 to the then Republican establishment's public objections to Barry Goldwater back in 1964. And lo and behold, this week you've written something about Mr. Trump's reported polling numbers compared to those of Mr. Reagan, who of course supported Mr. Goldwater in his iconic speech, A Time to Choose. So it's quite clear that Mr. Trump is neither a Goldwater nor a Reagan, but you have uncovered some meaningful similarities, not just in how the media is treating them, but in how the polling has turned out. Can you explain that?
That's exactly, your point is exactly right. Trump is not Reagan, he's not Goldwater, he's not a ideological conservative. So there's no analogs as far as that goes. But the analogs I was talking about in the 1980 election, which had Carter against Reagan, were in the fact that the press at the time treated Reagan as a pariah. He was a dangerous cowboy with his finger on the nuclear button. He was an idiot. He was a fool. He was somebody you couldn't trust. He was a racist. He was all these terrible things. They painted him in the most desperate, dire terms. And they made everybody shy about admitting that they would like Reagan. It was so bad that after the Republican convention, John Anderson, who was one of the Republican candidates who lost to Reagan in the primaries, became a never Reagan person and launched an independent bid for the presidency. So he was also in this race, and not unlike this year where we have Gary Johnson running as a libertarian, not quite as a never Trump, but as an alternative to Hillary or Trump. So the thing was that leading up to the election, about a month before the election, the polls had Reagan about 4 points down from Trump. I'm sorry. I'm getting so confused about all these things. Reagan was down about 4 points down from Carter. And there was about a 7-8% chance for 7-8% support for Anderson. Well, those polls did tighten by the end of the race, and the polls right before the election, immediately before the election, they had Reagan ahead, about 47 to 44, winning the election. But the eventual tallies had Reagan at 51%, much higher. This is an 8-point swing. So there was some of these people, many people, who were just not embarrassed to admit that they liked Reagan, but they were cowed. They were, pressured into not saying anything. And there was a lot of support, a lot of hidden support for Reagan that was out there. And you could tell that by the large number of undecideds or people who just weren't saying anything. And we're seeing exactly the same sort of phenomena with Trump. There's a lot of people. There's these never-Trumpers who are in the Republican establishment side. There's, of course, all the social justice warriors of the left who paint Trump in the most vicious terms that you can imagine. To say, that you're for Trump publicly, requires a lot of guts in some quarters. Not everywhere, of course, but in some quarters. I mean, if you're working at a company in New York or San Francisco or Los Angeles, if you're in Hollywood, this kind of thing, people who are Trump supporters are going to tend to keep their mouths shut about this. So I think in the end, right now the polls are very close, depending on which one you look at, of course. I mean, Trump and Clinton are almost in a tie. Clinton, maybe on the average, is slightly ahead, 2 points or so. But this is the same kind of thing we saw leading up to the 1980 election. I think we're going to see the same sort of thing in this election.
I agree. I have made this case frequently on the air and in writing. And I would say that there's obviously a lot of differences here. I mean, you have a sitting president versus, no incumbent. There's a lot of other factors that are involved. But when you talk about the environment, Reagan was the first president I ever voted for, so I'm familiar with, that was the beginning of my political career, sort of, anyway. But now things are much more hostile. The public pillorying that you take thanks to social media is enormous. So I would see that there is a lot more pressure for people who are shy about Trump, and I think that his base is very dedicated. They're obviously not afraid of anybody, but a lot of these people didn't vote before, and a lot of them registered to vote for Trump. And we saw that in New Hampshire. We had record primary turnout in the first in the nation primary, and we just had a statewide election where we had record lack of turnout. So I'm pretty sure that there's an awful lot of people out there that were in electoral hibernation who've come out, and become these born-again registered voters. And I'm not even sure if the pollsters are talking to those people. Do you think that's possible?
Well, polling has changed quite a lot, because of technology. A lot of people don't have landlines anymore, the younger people especially. They got to try to catch them on cell phones. A lot of cell phone calls are screened. It's very difficult to get a good sample of people. But, the support that you do find, a lot of people are anti-Trump. The Hillary people are anti-Trump. Of course they are. But a lot of the establishment people are also anti-Trump. But what you don't see is a lot of people who are pro-Hillary, in the sense that they can't wait for Hillary to be in office herself because they envision her as some great leader. So right after the debate, for instance, a lot of the establishment people and the people on the Republican side were wishing that Trump did better. I think he did just fine. Right after he had a rally in Florida, he had to turn thousands away, thousands of people who were rallying to his side. And today, a poll came out. You have to look at these polls that came out after the debate. There was this Gravis poll. It was a D+4, they call it, meaning they oversampled Democrats. This is the key point right here. They oversampled Democrats by about 4% because, in their opinion, they think in the eventual election, Democrats are going to outweigh Republicans by about 4%. And in that poll, after the debate, Trump was ahead of Hillary by 4 points. So this is a huge thing because, as you said, I'm bringing it back to your point, which is excellent. I don't think that they're right about this D+4 thing. We're not seeing this overwhelming support for Hillary. People are not coming out in droves for her. Her supporters are there, it's true, but the people who are for Trump are many, many more. A lot of new registrations, a lot of Democrats switching parties and so forth. I think his true support is not only because that we have a lot of people being shy about admitting liking Trump, but the polling methods themselves are relying on historical information, which is no longer quite as valid. Trump is not a standard Republican, so no. They can't use the standard methods, but they are. So I think that in the end, we're going to see quite a lot more support for Trump than the polls are saying.
You have a section in this article at stream.org where you talk about scientific polls and how there really just aren't anymore. Can you explain that?
Yeah, there is no such thing as a scientific poll. You'll hear, this is not a scientific poll and this isn't. No, every poll is an accurate, presuming nobody's lying or something like this or a miscalculation. But every poll is an accurate sample of the people who look like the people who were polled. And that's as simple as that. Every poll, so if you're going to, say, Fox News, they'll have one poll. If you go to CNN, they'll have another. And there'll be a disparate, difference because of the types of people who watch those two different networks. Well, all of that is fine. It tells you something about the types of people that they're sampling. But every poll also is a prediction. We need to treat every poll as a prediction of what the final outcome will be. And in that case, polls are often loaded in favor of Democrats. That's just the way they do these samples and the way it historically has turned out. And there's perhaps good reason for this. Everybody knows that the mainstream media sort of supports Democrats much more than they support Republicans. The media is often, if not the pollsters themselves, they commission these polls, and so the results might be slightly biased in their favor. So we need to not look at what is a scientific poll or non-scientific poll, because all polls are scientific. We need to look at good predictions. And in this case, a lot of people are going to be surprised. The predictions are failing sort of left and right. They failed in Europe in the past elections that we had there because people aren't seeing this rise of this sort of nationalism, right-wing nationalism, alt-right phenomena. The pollsters didn't catch it. In the Brexit vote, where the people of England voted either to remain in the European Union or to leave, again, we had a sort of a shy phenomena. All the celebrities in the world, all the politicians, all the major people said we must remain. And they painted the people who wanted to leave as these Neanderthals, these half-wits, these mouth breathers. Yet the polls had remained ahead by about 6 points right before the election. And when the election was held, it was the opposite, pretty much the opposite. And they, of course, voted to leave. So the polls, using all their standard methods and everything, failed dismally. They also failed in the British parliamentary elections. They did not foresee the immense rise of the conservative side, the gains that they would make. And that's happening in France as well. The polls also were wrong about Maria Le Pen and some of these conservative alt-right sort of candidates there. The standard methods just aren't working. And I think that this wave, at least in the West, is unappreciated by the pollsters and the statistical methods that they're using. And I think we're going to see the same phenomena happen here. At least I think we're seeing it right now.
I have a sneaking suspicion that there's going to be a lot of really upset liberals come election day. I hope so. I think that Mr. Trump is probably going to do very well. But I was going to say is it sounds a lot like the pollsters are kind of falling into a trap very similar to the climate computer modelers, where they're obsessed with their system so much that they really can't see the forest for the trees anymore.
That's a beautiful analogy. That's exactly right. That's a perfect analogy. The thing with the climate modelers is they love their theory. The theory is beautiful. It really is. It's a beautiful theory. It took many, many, many people with great brains, a lot of intelligence, endless man hours to create this theory, to create these computer models, and lives were given over to this thing. And of course they're in love with this theory. They should be. It's a wonderful thing. The only problem with it is it doesn't match reality. The predictions don't match reality. And it's the same thing with the pollsters. There's a lot of work that goes into these polls. I mean, we gloss over this here, but there's an immense amount of work that goes into these polls. And they have theories behind them that lead them to make their prediction. And they, too, are reluctant to change. They don't want to admit how much things are different than they used to be. And they, too, are in love with their theories. And I think they're going to have a very rude awakening. I mean, after all, I think we're going to see Barbara Streisand and I forgot who else move to Canada come November 30th.
I actually saw a sign online. I've been saving the picture. It was an ad for a real estate broker, and it says, "Moving to Canada, we can help."
That's perfect.
So you're a statistician. Your PhD is in basically math, right? Really? So do you think? I mean, I know the climate modelers are tied to the money, and they're probably not going to change. But pollsters make their living by having accurate polls. Do you think that if, say, for example, we have a Trump landslide, if they will stop and take a look at what they're doing and how it affects their business model?
Oh, they have to. There's probably, I don't know of any, but there has to be some polling organizations out there right now that are noticing this. They can't fail to see what is happening. They're reluctant, probably in this election, to do it before the votes are taken. I mean, there is the peer pressure thing even among pollsters. They don't want to give bad news. Look at what happened to Nate Silver. Nate Silver is this famous pollster who correctly called Barack Obama beating McCain. That was so welcome to the mainstream media, to the press, to the politicians, to the our cultural elites, that he soared in popularity, and he's making a fine living off of this. Unfortunately for poor Nate, he hasn't done too well since then. He really missed the interim elections that we had 2 years ago because he wasn't quite seeing what was going on, and he really badly blew the Republican primaries. Everybody was saying Trump hasn't a chance. There's no way Trump can win. It's ridiculous to believe Trump can win. I predicted back in January Trump would win the primaries easily. It was plain to see, as long as you were willing to change your mind about how you viewed things, and I think that's what all of these people need to do. And they will, like you say, they make their living on this. If they don't change, they're going to be in, as we used to say in the military, deep kimchi. They won't be able to continue their livelihoods, unlike climate modelers who rely on the government, and the government doesn't really care too much about reality. So there's a difference.
All right, we got about a minute left. Any closing remarks? How people reach you? You have a
blog,
right? Yep.
I do. I have you can go to stream.org. I have several articles on this there, or my own personal blog, wmbriggs.com. And pay attention to the polls that happen right after the debate. Make sure to look to see when the polls were taken after the debate. We're already seeing one or two come out, and Trump is pushed ahead. So he did better than most people are saying.
All right, Matt, thank you for your time. You have a great night.
You too. Thank you.
All righty, bye-bye.
Bye-bye.